There we are. Good morning. Thank you so much. Thank you, Christine. And thank you, Sister Miriam Ruth, for your kind invitation to join you here at Gillis today for this day of input that you're having on the place of confession in our lives and Catholic spirituality. As you're hearing, my name is Father Joshua Moir, and I am, in fact, the first of three speakers that you'll be hearing from over the next hour or so, each with our own theme. But it is a credit to Sister Miriam Ruth and the catechetics team that they've been able to structure these three talks, these three sort of episodes, so that you're not simply hearing isolated fragments of Catholic doctrine, but a true series of talks that each grounds the next. They each lay the foundation for the next step. The idea being that you begin to see our faith is not just a collection of atomized dogmas, but is instead more like a tapestry. It's a coherent whole. And to draw at the thread, to take a stance at one end of the tapestry, you necessarily tug at that same thread throughout the whole panorama. It can, consequently, be a little bit difficult to find the right weave, particularly when you're trying to do that by yourself. And so that's what we want to present to you today. An interwoven synthesis of dogma and theological ideas that is orthodox, that is functional, and that's sufficient to hold the front line against the repeated and varied assaults against the faith that are so common, that always have been common. I guess we're here trying to embolden you to keep the faith, keep your head and keep the faith, and to recognize the value of our Catholic practices, in this case, confession. After all, it might all sound a bit theoretical, but it just doesn't do to simply tell you that there's this thing called confession and you should do it. That's a conclusion, but it's not an explanation of the sacrament, or really even a motive to go. And we're all of us creative and rational people. Our curiosity isn't satisfied by that. We need to know why we have confession. We need to know why God, in his providence, decided from the realm of blessed eternity that this would be something good for us. And that conclusion we will reach in the third talk this morning. The reason for confession is, of course, sin. But even that is not unambiguous and without complexity. As soon as we scratch the surface and examine ourselves and the world around us, we find that sin is not something of our own creation, at least not at first. Our first experience of sin, our primordial experience, is not a choice or an action or an omission. It is rather a situation that we find ourselves in. Is sadly a situation in which the odds are often stacked against us. But while it is not our circus, we are the monkeys. We live with the consequences. We live with this brokenness in our lives and relationships. So that too requires some unpacking, and that's the topic of your second talk. But before we even get there, we're starting quite far out, quite remotely. We're starting from the question, how is all that even possible? How can it be, after God created a universe that he himself judged good, how can it possibly be that we're now in a situation where we can call things bad? How did sin seep through the gaps like a gas in an otherwise good and harmonious creation? Where, in the creation of the human species, is there the space for evil? Because it is worth saying, even now, here at the outset, that when we look for the roots of sin in our universe, we are looking for something distinctly, albeit not uniquely, human. Morality, good and evil, doesn't really make sense in relation to anything else. We don't think the shark that kills the seal is evil. We don't call that shark sinful. When one of my mum's dogs raids the bins for food, I might call it a bad dog, but I don't mean that in a moral way. I don't mean the dog is evil or accountable for what it's done. And so to even talk about good and evil and morality, I think we're necessarily talking about human beings. We're talking about something anthropological. In short, when we want to talk about morality, it relates to our very existence as human beings, creatures created for the purpose of loving God. And that is the specific thread that I want to draw upon with you now as we get started this morning. The capacity built into human nature to know God, to choose Him, and to love Him. And hopefully, as we square the circle, it'll become evident why it's important to understand that this is going on in the background whenever we talk about sin. And with that in mind, I really do think it's relevant to spend just a couple minutes with the creation accounts of Genesis. For in the gradual developing process, that is God's creation of the universe, all is made good. Human beings emerge at a relatively late stage in this process, and God finds them very good. Adam and Eve then dwell together in paradise. They walk with God and speak to Him directly in the cool of the evening in a garden and a world that has been created for them. They are the pinnacle of God's creativity, created to love and worship Him and be His partners in cultivating and caring for the rest of creation. And all they have is grace. All they have are the gifts of God. They know themselves to be created beings and do not live under the pretense that they are the masters in any way of their own fate. They know that their very life is a gift from God, and that the world that they care for has been given to them. Even their own companionship is a gift when God observed the loneliness of Adam and in His care created Eve from his side so that they might at least have each other. It's a myth that at its heart is trying to convey the beauty of the beginnings of humanity and the coherence and unity of all creation under the masterful hand of God. And so what goes so wrong? How did mankind come to leave the garden, to leave paradise? And how did everything that was so coherent become so fractious? Why do we no longer walk with God in the evening time through shaded woods and beside still lakes? Why do we now find the time we spend in His company in prayer sometimes just so trying? It is sin. But what gave man this capacity to bring about the collapse of such a beautiful and harmonious order? You know, man is incredible. Human beings are incredible. God Himself created this entire universe so that He might create man and woman, a creature able to be loved and to love Him in return. It's remarkable. This universe was made for man. And not just man in general, but each particular human being, where all of us, individually, willed by God, who loves us into existence. Not only that, but we are endowed with the gifts that we need to recognize our Creator and to develop a relationship with Him and to love Him. And that's what makes us different from the animals. I'm sorry to the dog down here at the front, but we are different. These gifts make us different. Our relationship with God makes us different. We are differentiated from the rest of material creation because we are not purely material. We are certainly material, and material things are good, but matter does have a limit. After all, matter cannot understand, matter cannot choose, matter cannot love. Spirit can understand, spirit can choose, spirit can love. And we are both matter and spirit, singular in all of creation. We share with the animals in the physical world, and we share with the angels in the spiritual realm. And with those angelic beings, we share the spiritual gifts of understanding, free choice, and love as fundamental aspects of our nature. And these aspects of spiritual beings, they're all ordered to one another. We have an intellect and rationality so that we can know and understand what is good. And when we know and understand, we have free will to choose the good. Freedom, free will, free choice. It's the blessing to God's creatures who share in the spiritual. Freedom is the gift that angels and men alone enjoy and express. We don't blame the shark when he eats the seal. And I don't blame my mum's dog when he raids the bins, because they are in fact not free to do otherwise. Animals do not have a choice to do or not do, but simply follow the dictates of their own instinct. Plants do not choose if they must bloom, but rather, quite without thought, simply must respond to the radiance of the sun. These material beings, they do not pertain to the spiritual order, and they do not share in the freedom which we are granted. And it is manifestly evident that freedom is that which underlies our conception of morality. Freedom underlies our conception of good and evil, because it doesn't make sense otherwise. Freedom is the necessary precondition for morality. And sometimes, I understand, I get it, one wonders why at all it should be in God's gift to us. After all, where do we find a freedom that is not abused? Among the angels, there were those who used their freedom to rebel against God. And humanity, too, suffers even today from the free choice of our first parents, as you will soon hear. So why on earth are we cursed with this blessing of freedom? Why does the option to choose against our loving Creator, who sustains us in being and breath, why does that choice even exist, that capacity to choose? Why should we be cursed with it? Why will He not take away my freedom so that I can be the Christian that I ardently want to be? Because then, if there were no freedom, there would be no love. Or rather, God might still love us, but we would be unable consciously to love Him in return. And we are created to consciously, to willfully, to purposefully love God. We don't make sense otherwise. Human beings, they exist for that reason. And it is our capacity to know, and it is our capacity to choose, freely choose, that makes us capable of love. And love is the very purpose of our existence. So, we are made to love God. To love Him, we must first know Him and choose Him. We can recognize Him in the world around us, even if we cannot know Him in the full and personal way that we need to without His revelation. But all our interior structures, the nature of human beings, is orientated towards knowing God, to choosing Him. And it is necessary to our well-being to choose Him, to know Him. We are not ourselves without that relationship. He is the environment of man's spiritual nature, a nature that is simply not satisfied by the purely material. We Christians, we are not like those who live for the purely material, those who live without hope. We are not like those who believe that this short time on earth is all that our vital souls have to offer. And we do not allow ourselves to be drowned by the decadent earthly indulgences to numb ourselves and to take from life what we can get while we can get it. Instead, we live our lives preparing for the eternal joy of paradise, for that day when, in majesty, the trumpet will sound, and the Lord Himself will call out our own name, calling us to Himself. God is the environment of our human nature, and the yearning for God is written on our very hearts, the very core of our creation and being. And God bestows on us the grace to freely choose Him and find that fulfillment in Him. And He delights in us. He calls us to Him out from the carbon and dust of the earth of which we are made, and He lowers Himself to us. To us, He imparts the spark of life, the breath of life, and the gifts that we need to search for Him, to find Him, to know Him, and to love Him. And know now, no human weakness or limitation will ever prevent the floods of His grace throughout history and creation. But that was when we were yet young. No longer do we reside in the garden of our creation, the paradise of our origin. The call we hear now is perhaps not the gentle call of our creation as it was, but is the call of God, who called out for Adam and Eve, even as they hid from Him, as though He were some threat. It is the call of a shepherd who searches for lost sheep, lost as we are by the misuse of that free choice, that free will, and wounded as we are by our sin. But all of that is the subject of your next talk. God bless you. Thank you.